I was born Amelia Cross, a name as forgettable as the woman I used to be. My first life ended not with a bullet or a disease but with a kiss. A kiss I gave my husband, Matthew Langford, on our 5th anniversary. A kiss that sealed my death sentence. Because hours later, as I lay unconscious in a hotel bathtub, my head bleeding from a fall I never saw coming, I heard them. Whispering. Laughing. My husband, and my best friend Cassandra. You think anyone will ask questions? She giggled. Not when it's her. Everyone thinks she's clumsy anyway, he whispered. It's perfect. We're free. I wanted to scream. To get up. To fight. But my body didn't listen. My mind faded. And I died. At least that's what they thought. But someone had different plans. When I opened my eyes again, the calendar read exactly 2 years before that night. I was standing in the bathroom of our old apartment, holding the positive pregnancy test that had once been the start of my downfall. Same world. Same body. But this time, I wasn't the same woman. I stared into the mirror and said it aloud. Amelia is dead. I am reborn. Reborn with memory, with rage, and with a gift I never had before, clarity. The first time around I was naive. Trusting. I thought Matthew's coldness was stress. I thought Cassandra's flirtations with him were just jokes. I thought love meant enduring. But now I saw their smirks, their secrets, and how easily I'd been erased. I could still hear Matthew's voice from that night. She was a weight dragging me down. Always with her emotions and dreams. Pathetic. I clenched my fist. Not this time. I took a week off work, faking illness. And while Matthew ran to comfort Cassandra, I ran simulations in my mind. If I played the same moves, I'd die the same death. So I changed the board. First, I aborted the pregnancy. Maybe. But I refused to bring a child into the world with a father who plotted murder and a mother drowning in pain. Second, I handed in my resignation. My job as a junior editor at Langford Publishing, Matthew's family's firm, had once been my pride. But now I saw it for what it was, a trap, a leash. They paid me crumbs while I built their empire from the shadows. So I walked away with a quiet smile and a list of every dirty contract I'd ever filed. And third, I changed my name. Legally, publicly, and socially, I became Elena Ward. The past couldn't chain me anymore. By the end of the month, Amelia Cross no longer existed. The next step. Power. And I found it in the most unlikely place. Sebastian Hale. Theo of Haletic. Ruthless. Reserved. And my secret weapon. In my first life, he was the man Matthew called a shark in a suit. I remembered Matthew mocking him during a failed merger pitch. How Sebastian had humiliated him by rejecting Langford Publishing's desperate offer. But I remembered something else too. Sebastian wasn't cruel. He was meticulous. And meticulous people are the easiest to align with when you have what they want. I sent him a proposal, anonymous at first, through a third-party firm I quickly formed under the name Ward Strategies. Inside it were files on Langford Publishing's hidden finances, bribery records, falsified data, and insider fraud that could ruin their legacy overnight. Sebastian called me within 24 hours. "Who are you?" he asked. "Someone who knows their empire was built on lies," I replied. "And someone who wants to destroy it. Legally." There was a long pause on the line. Then a slow chuckle. "I like your style." And just like that, I was inside. Not as an employee. Not as a beggar. But as a partner. 4 months I worked in the shadows. Rewriting contracts, feeding intel, building a case that would collapse Langford Publishing from the inside out. All while Matthew grew more smug, more certain. I watched him propose to Cassandra on social media with the same ring he once gave me. I watched the comments roll in, calling them a power couple. I watched her wear my mother's earrings, passed down to me, and stolen while I lay unconscious. But I didn't cry. I documented. And I waited. Waited for their wedding invitation. When it arrived 6 months later, I laughed. They thought I was dead, vanished, irrelevant. And now they were inviting the world to watch them rise. Perfect. Because I had no intention of missing it. Not when I had my own surprise. The entire ballroom had fallen into a stunned, breathless silence. Matthew Langford, once composed, cocky, and charismatic, was now stammering, his fingers clutching Cassandra's hand so tightly she winced. I stood just beyond the gold-trimmed aisle, perfectly poised in my crimson gown that shimmered like spilled wine under the chandeliers. And beside me, Sebastian Hale. Not just a date. Not just a man. But the future owner of every asset Matthew once arrogantly claimed as untouchable. Sebastian didn't smile. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough to rattle every Langford executive in the room. Their whispered confusion turned to alarm when they saw the smirk twitch at the corners of his mouth. What is she doing here? Matthew finally gasped, voice cracking like a boy caught cheating on an exam. My heels clicked against marble as I stepped forward. Calm, steady, and with more power in my stride than I'd ever held in my previous life. Oh, don't stop on my account, I said, eyes scanning the crowd. I wouldn't dream of interrupting. Such a sacred union. The tension snapped like glass under pressure. A few guests, mostly from Cassandra's side, let out awkward chuckles. Others just stared, unsure if this was some elaborate joke. Cassandra's smile had frozen. Her perfectly painted lips trembled. She's not on the guest list, she hissed, voice trembling as she turned to Matthew. You said she left the country. No, he said under his breath, staring at me as if seeing the specter of a past crime come alive. She's not supposed to be alive. Let's rewind. 4 days earlier, I delivered the final packet to Sebastian. A black folder, embossed with gold. Inside were contracts. Real ones. Illegal ones. And a deal. A merger proposal that would make Hale Tech the majority shareholder in Langford Publishing through a chain of shell corporations. Each one funded and structured with my intimate knowledge of Langford's corruption. Sebastian raised a brow as he flipped through the final pages. You're offering me the entire company, he said. I'm offering you control, I corrected. Ownership? That'll come naturally once their secrets are public. And in return? I want to be there when it collapses, I said simply. I want to see his face when it happens. Sebastian nodded, silent for a moment. Then he reached for a pen. And signed. Back to the wedding. I didn't come alone, I told Matthew, enjoying the pale sheen of sweat on his forehead. I brought a gift. One you'll remember long after this day. Sebastian stepped forward, handing a velvet envelope to one of the stunned Langford board members in attendance. The man opened it hesitantly, then paled as he read. What is it? Matthew barked. An official notification, I said. As of this morning, Hale Tech holds 52% of Langford Publishing's voting shares. That silenced the room. Matthew's father, Charles Langford, staggered from his seat in the front row. That's impossible. You'd need board approval. You'd need transparency, honesty. I asked sweetly. You should know by now your son's never been good at either. Why you forged documents? Matthew shouted, his voice rising to a desperate pitch. Oh no, I replied calmly. Everything was legal. But it turns out when you treat employees like trash and steal from shareholders, people are more than happy to sign your company away. Cassandra's mouth dropped open. You can't do this. This is our wedding. I finally turned to her, truly looking at the woman who once giggled beside my hospital bed as I bled out. Cassandra, I said softly. You married a thief. A liar. And a coward. The least I could do was make sure your honeymoon is spent explaining bankruptcy paperwork. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But I wasn't done. I reached into my bag and pulled out a USB drive. This, I announced, raising it high, is a digital copy of every transaction, every bribe, every falsified report Langford Publishing has made in the past 6 years. I've sent it to the press, the IRS, and of course to your investors. Charles collapsed into his seat. His wife had turned ghost white. And Matthew? He lunged. Like a rabid animal who'd just realized the cage door had closed behind him. He reached for my arm, his expression twisted with rage. You bitch, he shouted. You ruined everything. I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. I simply stepped aside and let Sebastian do what needed to be done. He caught Matthew mid-charge, gripping his wrist with surgical precision. Touch her again, Sebastian said coldly, and I'll make sure you don't just lose your company, you'll lose your name. Matthew struggled, his breath ragged, until Sebastian released him with a shove. This isn't over, he spat. But we both knew it was. He just hadn't accepted it yet. Later that night I watched the fallout unfold. The wedding guests had left in a flurry of whispers and wide eyes. The ballroom stood eerily empty, save for the scattered petals, overturned champagne glasses and the echo of ruined vows. Sebastian walked beside me as we exited, his silence heavy, but not uncomfortable. "You know," he finally said, "you didn't need to show up. The documents alone would have destroyed him." I turned to him, lips curled in a quiet, dangerous smile. "Oh, but I wanted to see it." Sebastian nodded. "I'm starting to think you're more dangerous than I am." I looked out at the moonlit city. "Maybe," I said. "But only to the men who bury women they think are weak." The morning after the wedding meltdown, the Langford offices were chaos. The media storm hadn't passed, it had grown teeth. Shareholders were panicking, employees were leaking internal memos, and junior executives were scrambling to protect their names. I watched it all from a floor-to-ceiling glass window on the 52nd floor of Hale Tech's tower. A view Matthew once boasted about. A view he thought only belonged to the elite. It now belonged to me. Sebastian entered the room with a slow clap. "3 departments already offered resignation letters," he said, handing me a stack of papers. "And legal confirmed the board must convene today. They're expecting you at 3 p.m. I raised a brow. "Expecting me?" He smirked. "I told them our new chairwoman would be attending. Who else could deliver the final blow?" 3 p.m., Langford Publishing headquarters. The very building where I once fetched coffee and stapled reports like a good little wife. The same corridors I walked on eggshells, terrified to say the wrong thing around Matthew. Where my voice was dismissed, my work stolen, and my identity reduced to nothing more than a last name. This time I walked in wearing power like perfume. A sleek black pantsuit. Hair pinned into a crown of pins and polish. Eyes lined not for vanity, but for war. The boardroom was full. 12 members. 3 lawyers. 2 Langfords. And 1 ghost from the past. Matthew stood when I entered. "Elena," he growled. "It's Ms. Ward now," I replied, lowering myself gracefully into the chair at the head of the table. The moment my hands touched the polished wood, I saw it. The flicker of realization in their eyes. This wasn't just revenge. This was a hostile takeover, and I was now their boss. Charles Langford, still reeling from the collapse, tried to regain some control. "This is absurd. This woman, she's not family. She's not even. She's your largest shareholder now," Sebastian cut in from the corner, arms folded. "Which makes her voice louder than yours." Matthew shot up, palms slamming against the table. "You manipulated your way into this. You tricked people. You seduced him." "Careful," I said softly. "Don't embarrass yourself more than you already have." His jaw tightened. "You think this gives you purpose? Revenge? You're pathetic." "No," I said, locking eyes with him. "What's pathetic is a man who thought he could murder his wife, marry his mistress, and erase the past with champagne and Instagram captions." The board fell silent. One of the lawyers coughed nervously. "I've prepared my terms," I said, sliding folders down the table. "Langford Publishing will retain its name for now. But all executive decisions run through me. Financial restructuring begins immediately. Every corrupt manager is out. Every underpaid intern gets a raise. And Cassandra Langford." I smiled. "No longer on payroll." "She was never officially hired," Charles muttered. "Still nice to make it official," I said. "Don't you think, Matthew?" That night I sat alone in my new office. Matthew's old one. I opened the drawer where he used to keep cigars and found what I'd hoped. A journal. Full of scribbled ideas, arrogant dreams, and notes about managing me. He'd written, "Amelia doesn't understand the game. He never will. I'll handle it." I tore the page out and slid it into the fireplace. "Watch me handle it now," I whispered. Meanwhile, Matthew was unraveling. His assets were frozen. His wedding scandal had gone viral. Cassandra had vanished to her sisters in tears, blaming him for the downfall. And worst of all, he no longer had control over anything. I expected him to confront me eventually. I didn't expect it so soon. 3 days later, I exited the building to find him leaning against my car. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes bloodshot. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond. I simply walked past him, letting silence drag behind me like a blade. "You followed. You had everything. You had me. You could have walked away quietly." I turned then, slowly looking at him the way I might an insect on a windshield. You don't get to ask why, Matthew. You left me to die. You watched me bleed, and you planned your honeymoon before I hit the hospital floor. He stepped back. I didn't mean for it to go that far. But it did. And now so will I. His voice cracked. Was it always about revenge? I stared at him. No, I said. It was about justice. Revenge is just the consequence of you surviving long enough to see it. The next month was glorious. I restructured departments, promoted women who had once been ignored, gave second chances to those Matthew had mocked, hired back an assistant who had once been fired for speaking out. Langford Publishing transformed, not into something new but something honest. And the whispers began. She's brilliant. She's ruthless. She's not just Hale's partner, she's a storm. I liked that one best. But storms don't stay still. And there was still one thing left unfinished. Cassandra. I hadn't seen her since the wedding. But I knew where she'd gone. I knew her sister ran a boutique charity. And I knew she'd eventually return to lick her wounds. Sure enough, she showed up at the building one morning, red-lipped, tearless and bold. Let me explain, she said, slipping into my office like she belonged there. You have 2 minutes, I replied without looking up from my screen. She sat. She pleaded. She blamed Matthew. She talked about friendship, about jealousy, about how we were all victims. I let her finish. Then I spoke slowly without blinking. You slept with my husband. You tried to steal my life. You wore my jewelry while planning my funeral. And now you think this is about forgiveness. She went pale. I didn't know he'd hurt you. You were in the room, Cassandra. You were laughing. The silence stretched like glass. I didn't come back from the dead for a heart-to-heart, I said, standing. I came back to make sure women like me never fall for women like you again. I just want peace, she whispered. I stepped close, stared her down and said, then start by staying out of my city. She left. Quietly. Just the way I always wanted her to. The invitations came subtly at first. Emails, quiet texts from old friends, lunch requests from socialites who used to whisper when I walked into the room. Then came the calls. From people who once posted photos from Matthew and Cassandra's engagement party the week after my accident. From women who attended my funeral in black satin and red lipstick. From men who once sent condolences to Matthew with a wink and as she was sweet, but not built for power. Now they wanted meetings, opportunities, favors. Because Elena Ward was no longer a ghost. She was the new face of power. It started with an industry gala. One Matthew had always bragged about being invited to. Only this time I wasn't on the guest list. I was the keynote speaker. The press arrived early. Paparazzi lined the velvet ropes. I stepped out in a sapphire silk gown with a neckline as sharp as my reputation and Sebastian Hale by my side like a shield of tailored steel. Every head turned. The whispers followed us down the carpet. Is that her? She's even more powerful than before. She's the one who destroyed Langford Publishing. No, she saved it. And in the middle of the chaos stood her. Vanessa Bloom. Once my colleague. Then Matthew's confidant. Now, irrelevant. She smiled too widely when she approached. Elena. You look well. I mean really, stunning. I raised a brow. Didn't you once say I was more intern than executive? She laughed nervously. Oh, come on, that was forever ago. Water under the bridge, right? I let the silence sit between us like a wall. I suppose it depends on whether that water was poisoned, I said coolly. Excuse me, Vanessa. I have a stage to claim. The speech was simple, direct, and loaded with quiet vengeance. I spoke of transparency, rebirth, and the importance of leadership built on integrity, not legacy. I didn't name names. But every person who betrayed me felt my words crawl under their skin like cold steel. And after the applause they lined up, one by one, to shake my hand, to smile at the woman they once stepped over. And I smiled back. Because I had already built my empire on something stronger than revenge. Memory. The next few weeks brought an avalanche of requests. Former board members offered friendly business pitches. PR companies who once dropped me called to rebuild a new image. And worst of all, Cassandra. She arrived at my office uninvited. Hair styled in soft waves, designer coat draped dramatically, eyes wide with performative tears. "I've left him," she whispered. I didn't blink. "Your mistake. Not my concern." She clutched her purse tighter. "I was manipulated. You know how charming he can be. And yet you chose him over our friendship," I said, folding my arms. "You took what was mine, mocked me while I bled out, and now you want what? Forgiveness." Her voice cracked. "I want a job." My smile didn't reach my eyes. "So you watched me die, and now want me to sign your paycheck?" She nodded slowly. "I'm desperate." I leaned in, my voice a whisper. "Then I suggest you try earning your way up, the way I had to. But don't knock on my door again." I pressed the intercom. "Security." She stood, cheeks flushed with humiliation, and walked out. And as the door closed behind her, I breathed easier. Not out of relief. Out of closure. But fate. It always leaves room for one last twist. A week later I received a letter. Handwritten. Sloppy. Unfolded at the edges. From Matthew. "Amelia. I don't know where you found the strength to do what you did. I see you now, truly see you. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need to talk. Just once. I don't have anyone left. Please. Just give me 10 minutes. I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I said yes. But not for love. Not for nostalgia. For something much colder. Closure. We met at the old park bench where he first proposed to me. The trees were bare now, stripped by winter, and so was he. Gone were the designer suits and polished charm. He looked smaller. Older. Fractured. I sat beside him. Silent. "I dreamed of this moment," he whispered. "Begged for it." I nodded. "And now you have it. Speak." He swallowed hard. "I thought I was doing the right thing. For myself. For my future. But I've lost everything. Cassandra's gone. The Langfords won't speak to me. I live in a one-bedroom apartment and people cross the street when they see me coming." I said nothing. He looked at me then, with tears forming. "You were the best thing in my life. And I destroyed you." "No," I said gently. "You tried. But I survived." The tears fell freely. "I don't deserve a second chance," he whispered. "You're right." He looked up, startled. "That's why I'm not giving you one." He stared. Broken. Begging. But I stood. "Goodbye, Matthew." And for the first time, I meant it. A year had passed since the wedding scandal. Langford Publishing no longer bore that name. It was now Ward and Hale Media, and I stood as its chairwoman and majority owner. We'd merged, evolved, and expanded across 3 cities. But the past? It still echoed. One morning I arrived at the office to find a legal document on my desk. Petition to reclaim the Langford family name and holdings. Filed by Charles Langford himself. The man who once told me I was just a distraction in his son's ambitions, was now claiming I'd unlawfully seized what rightfully belonged to his bloodline. The arrogance would have made me laugh, if it weren't so pathetic. I handed the document to Sebastian, who scanned it with a smirk. "They want their corpse back," he said. "Let them try," I replied. We'd played fair up until now, dismantling their empire with facts, finance, and exposure. But if they wanted war? They were about to see what it meant to face a woman who died once and learned that silence was a luxury only the naive could afford. 2 weeks later we met in court. The courtroom was cold. Unforgiving. Much like me. Charles Langford arrived in an outdated suit, his pride still walking beside him like a shadow. Matthew followed, eyes hollow, more a puppet than a son now. And to no one's surprise, Cassandra trailed behind. Now pregnant, now desperate. She wore a plain black dress and no ring. But she still looked at me like I was the reason her world had burned. As if I'd lit the match. Not simply returned to witness the fire. The judge called us forward. Their attorney stood to argue that Langford Publishing had been built on family legacy, that I had manipulated my way into ownership, and that restitution should be granted. When it was my turn I rose. "My name is Elena Ward," I began. "I legally own every share in question. I have not violated a single statute, but I will gladly show the court the documents proving Langford Publishing's money laundering, employee abuse, and insider fraud, all of which occurred long before I ever set foot in this position." The courtroom murmured. I looked Charles dead in the eye. "Your family didn't lose their name because I took it. You lost it because you buried it under lies, entitlement, and ego. And then I turned to Matthew. His eyes met mine for the briefest second before dropping. You were given an empire and you destroyed it. I built one from your ashes. And now I carry the weight of your name not as a burden, but as proof that I survived it. The judge ruled in my favor. Of course. Because justice, when backed with truth and strategy, never stumbles. And as I walked past Cassandra, she whispered bitterly, "You're still bitter." I paused. Slowly turned. "No, Cassandra. I'm better. You should try it." That night, I sat in my penthouse, sipping wine while overlooking the city skyline. The same skyline I used to view from a tiny balcony, wondering how people like Matthew rose so easily while women like me were buried in their shadows. But now, my name was etched into buildings. My reputation whispered through boardrooms. My presence silenced the ones who once laughed. And yet, power is a funny thing. It keeps inviting ghosts to the table. The next day, my assistant knocked on the door. "You have a visitor. A Mr. Ryland Hale." I froze. Ryland Hale. Sebastian's younger brother. And the man I had once, briefly, trusted before rebirth. In my past life he played both sides, smiling to me while feeding Matthew insider tips. He entered, charming smile intact, designer shoes polished. "Elena," he said with a smirk. "Looking powerful as ever. I assume you're not here for compliments." He sat across from me, too comfortable. "I've heard rumors that you're taking over an international publishing branch, and that you've bought out Langford's last remaining asset in Europe." I said nothing. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Let me buy in. I'll invest. We can partner, Hale and Ward, not Sebastian and Ward." So that was it. The last vulture circling. "Ryland," I said slowly, "you tried to destroy me in my last life." His smile faltered. "I know everything now. How you helped Matthew sell off the Singapore project behind my back. How you faked data to sabotage my presentation. You thought I'd never find out. That was years ago." "No," I interrupted. "That was a lifetime ago. And this time I don't let snakes into my garden." He stood abruptly, mask slipping. "You think you're invincible now?" "No," I replied. "I know I am." He left, slamming the door behind him. And just like that, the last echo of betrayal was silenced. Weeks passed, and with it came quiet. Peaceful, powerful quiet. Until one morning I received a letter. Not from a Langford. Not from a Hale. From a foundation for battered women. A shelter I had anonymously funded months ago. The letter wasn't asking for money. It was thanking me. One of the women I'd helped had started her own business. She was hiring other survivors. She'd named the business Ashes and Company. The note read, "You gave me more than a donation. You gave me an example. I saw the video of your speech. I read your story. You rose from the grave and turned it into a throne. So I followed. Thank you for showing me that fire doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it frees us." I sat back. Eyes burning. Heart full. That was power. Not just ruining those who broke you, but inspiring those still crawling through the smoke. The city whispered my name now, not in hushed pity but in calculated awe. Elena Ward. Architect of a media empire. And the storm that rewrote an entire dynasty. But even the most powerful storm leaves behind dust. And that dust sometimes stirs. One morning I opened the paper to see a headline I hadn't expected. Langford files for bankruptcy protection. Ex-heir missing. Matthew Langford had disappeared. His assets had dried up. His name was blacklisted from every boardroom that once begged for his time. And now he'd vanished like the coward he'd always been. I should have felt satisfaction, triumph, finality. But all I felt was nothing. Because I had already closed his chapter. This was merely an echo. Until I got the call. "Miss Ward," my assistant said hesitantly. "There's someone asking to speak to you." Matthew. I should have hung up. Blocked him again. But something in her voice made me pause. "He's at the front desk," she said. "And he's not alone." Not alone. I descended the elevator, unsure what I'd find. And there he was. Disheveled. Thin. Worn like old leather. And beside him, a child. A little girl no older than 4. Dark curls, tired eyes. "Her name is Isla," he said as I approached. "She's mine. And Cassandra's." I blinked. "Why are you here, Matthew?" His hands shook. Cassandra left us. Took everything and ran. And I have nothing left. And what do you want from me? I asked coldly. Not money, he said quickly. Not pity. Just help. For her. She didn't ask for any of this. I looked down at Isla. Her eyes stared up at me unblinking. Too young to know her father once buried a woman like a secret. Too innocent to be collateral damage. I knelt. Do you like books? I asked her softly. She nodded. I smiled gently. Me too. Then I stood and turned to Matthew. There's a woman's shelter 3 blocks down. They offer free housing, childcare, and legal aid. I'll make a call. That's all. He lowered his head, ashamed. You're better than me. No, I said. I'm just not you. Weeks passed. The media erupted with the story of Cassandra's scandal. How she drained the last of Matthew's savings and fled the country. How she'd been using aliases for years and had ties to financial fraud. I didn't flinch when her photo hit the news. I didn't smile either. Because revenge wasn't a performance anymore. It was a path I'd already walked. Now I was simply free. My empire grew. Ward and Hale launched a women-led publishing line that became a global sensation. We spotlighted voices that had been silenced, erased, or discarded, stories like mine and stories even darker. One night while reviewing a manuscript submission, I stopped cold. The title, Dead Doesn't Mean Gone. The author, Amelia Cross. It was anonymous, of course. A pen name. A whisper of who I once was. But the story? It was mine. All of it. I had written it secretly in hotel rooms and quiet moments. Never expecting to publish. Never expecting to share. But now. I wasn't afraid anymore. We released it under our imprint. It sold out in 2 days. At the book launch, I stood before a crowd of women in power suits and fire in their hearts. They had all read the story. They knew the betrayal. Fame. The resurrection. And they knew. I was the woman in the pages. Why did you release it under your old name? A reporter asked. I smiled. Because Amelia Cross died in silence. And she deserves to live in every woman who ever thought she couldn't rise. In the months that followed, I received hundreds of letters. From survivors. Fighters. Women clawing their way back from grief, betrayal, violence. One letter stopped me cold. You don't know me. But I was in that shelter you funded. Your story, it saved my life. I named my daughter Elena. Thank you. I held the letter against my chest. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just my story anymore. It belonged to every woman who ever whispered, I'll never be enough. And now they shouted, I already am. The final scene. Years later, at a charity gala in New York, I stood on the balcony overlooking the city that once swallowed me whole. Sebastian approached, his fingers lacing through mine. He had been more than a business partner now. Quietly, steadily, he'd become the only man I allowed to touch the most fragile parts of me without breaking them. You did it, he said quietly. No, I corrected, leaning into him. We did. Behind us, guests clinked glasses to a foundation in my name. Across the ballroom, a girl in a red dress read Dead Doesn't Mean Gone, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. I remembered being her. Lost. Afraid. Silent. No. I was the reason she believed she could be more. Sebastian kissed my forehead. So what's next, Elena? I turned to face the city. The world. I write new stories, I said. Better ones. The end.